That night, a small diner tucked itself along the roadside, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns hanging by the windows. The air inside was warm and filled with a comforting aroma of toasted bread and steaming hot soup. The clinking of plates and glasses blended harmoniously with the cheerful chatter of families gathered for dinner. A young couple was playfully entertaining their child, while in another corner, a group of friends exchanged laughter over light-hearted stories. The cozy scene inside the diner stood in stark contrast to the bitterly cold night outside. Gusts of icy wind seeped through the cracks of the door, bringing a biting chill that seemed to cut through skin. An elderly man with a frail appearance stepped through the door, drawing a few glances from the patrons. His worn-out coat offered little protection against the cold. His battered shoes, with their soles worn so thin that his toes peeked through, paired with his gaunt face, told the story of his hardships. He removed his tattered wool hat, his hands trembling as he brushed back his disheveled gray hair. His every step toward the counter was slow and heavy, as if burdened by the weight of years of struggle. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out an old, weathered wallet and carefully took out a few small coins, placing them on the counter. His voice, almost a whisper, carried a desperate plea, though it seemed he wished no one would hear. "Just a bowl of soup, please, the cheapest one you have." The young waitress behind the counter hesitated, her eyes scanning the small pile of coins on the counter. She glanced briefly at the owner for guidance, then leaned forward and spoke softly, but with a hint of cold detachment. "I'm sorry, sir, but this isn't enough to cover anything on the menu." She gave him another look, her expression tinged with unease. Yet, ultimately she maintained a distant and indifferent demeanor, as though afraid that showing compassion might invite criticism. The old man lowered his head, as if trying to shrink under the weight of the cold stares directed at him. A few customers in the diner began murmuring, and some even cast contemptuous glances his way. Just then, the owner of the diner, a middle-aged man with a stern face and a sharp voice, emerged from the kitchen. He spoke loudly, his tone dripping with annoyance. "You're bothering my customers. Leave this place immediately." Laughter erupted from a few nearby tables, adding fuel to the old man's humiliation. He stood frozen, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, as if he had long grown accustomed to such disdain. He began to turn, his frail legs trembling beneath him, when a deep voice rang out, calm, yet commanding. "He's not going anywhere. I'll pay for his dinner." The diner fell into sudden silence, all eyes turned toward the man who had spoken. A tall figure rose from a corner table, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. The warm yellow light from the overhead lamps reflected off his salt and pepper hair, and as his face came into view, a wave of recognition swept through the room. It was Elon Musk. Yunan wasn't someone who often frequented small, humble places like this. His life was a relentless cycle of high-stakes meetings, groundbreaking technological projects, and the ceaseless pressure of leading global innovation across multiple industries. Tonight was no exception. He had just left a lengthy discussion about SpaceX's newest plans, a meeting that had drained his energy with its barrage of numbers, projections, and critical decisions. As his Tesla cruised along the empty street, the soft golden glow of a small diner's window caught his eye. Through the fogged-up glass, he could see families gathered, their faces lit with joy, and the sound of laughter and lively chatter filled the air. That scene stirred something deep within Elon, a distant memory of his childhood. He pictured himself as a young boy, sharing simple meals that were rich with love and warmth. He wasn't hungry, nor was he short on options for dining, but tonight, amidst the storm of his professional obligations, he found himself yearning for a moment of peace. A quiet, intimate place where he could reconnect with a sense of simplicity and solace. Elon stepped into the diner with a hope to recapture that fleeting sense of calm. Yet, the tranquility he sought was shattered the moment he witnessed the scene unfolding before him. As Elon sat quietly in the corner of the diner, the door opened with a sharp creak, letting in a gust of frigid wind from outside. An elderly man, frail and hunched, stepped inside, his trembling hands clutching a battered gray wool hat. His tattered clothes did little to shield him from the biting cold of the night. The stark contrast between the man's thin, lonely figure and the warmth and cheerfulness of the diner's interior was undeniable. Elon's eyes followed the man as he shuffled slowly toward the counter, his movements heavy with exhaustion. After hearing the owner's cold words, Elon watched as the old man's cold words began to tremble, his bony hands gripping tightly onto his empty wallet. Elon couldn't sit idly by. No one, least of all an elderly man, deserved to be treated like that. There was something deeply unsettling about the sight of the old man, something that struck Elon's heart with an unexpected ache. The man's sorrowful eyes, his worn demeanor, stirred a faint sense of familiarity, like the whisper of a long-forgotten memory coming back to life. That was why Elon Musk spoke up, why he stepped forward and offered to pay for the man's meal. Approaching the counter, Elon reached into his pocket, pulling out his credit card. His voice, calm yet firm, cut through the tense silence. Please prepare the best meal you can for him, and do so with kindness. After settling the payment, Elon put the card back into his pocket and turned toward the elderly man, who stood motionless near the door, his hand still gripping the worn wallet. The old man's head was bowed low, as though he couldn't believe someone had stood up for him. Elon stopped in front of him, leaning down slightly to meet his eyeline, and smiled warmly. Sir, please allow me to pay for your meal today. A hot bowl of soup and a few good dishes to make you feel better. I hope you don't mind. The old man's hands trembled as he slowly raised his head, his clouded eyes filled with both surprise and hesitation. He looked at Elon for a long moment, as if trying to confirm that this was real, not some fleeting dream. Finally, his lips quivered as he spoke, his voice barely audible. You are so kind. I don't know how to thank you. As the old man lifted his head higher, the light above the counter illuminated his face, making his features clearer. Elon froze. There was something unmistakable in the man's eyes, in the deeply etched lines of his weathered face. A flicker of recognition struck Elon, a familiarity that sent a chill through his chest. He stepped closer, studying the man more intently. And suddenly, as if a veil had been lifted, a truth he had never expected hit him. Elon stood there, silent, his mind racing with the realization. More than 30 years ago, when Elon was just a young student in Pretoria, Mr. McGrady was his physics teacher, a man well known for his strictness and high expectations in academics. Mr. McGrady's classes were nothing like the others, where students felt free to express their ideas or ask questions openly. He placed great emphasis on precision and discipline, standards that not every child could meet. To his students, Mr. McGrady's physics class was a daunting challenge, a place where every mistake was called out without leniency. Many students dreaded his sharp gaze when they gave incorrect answers or failed to meet his expectations. Those who were diligent and excelled academically often received his praise, but students like Elon, who thought differently and often challenged conventional thinking, were more likely to face his stern criticism, sometimes to the point where Elon felt dismissed. Mush, you're just good at fanciful daydreams. You can't stick with anything long enough to succeed. These words weren't just critiques. To a child like Elon, they were a rejection of the bold ideas he wholeheartedly believed in. But Elon wasn't the only one who felt the weight of Mr. McGrady's high standards. His classmates also often felt anxious before tests or presentations, knowing that the teacher rarely let any mistake slide. Yet, not everything about Mr. McGrady was negative. For students who could please him with hard work and neatly executed assignments, he often proved to be a capable and effective teacher. He delivered through lectures, leaving no aspect of the subject untouched. However, his inflexibility and overly high expectations left many students feeling constrained. Creative ideas, no matter how innovative, were often dismissed outright. Once, Elon presented an idea for a solar-powered engine in a school essay. He had spent days researching and writing theories he believed could revolutionize how the world uses fuel. But instead of praise, Mr. McGrady dismissed it outright. That sounds ridiculous. Don't waste your time on unrealistic ideas. Elon was deeply disappointed. It felt as though all his effort had been invalidated, but instead of giving up, he quietly turned the criticism into motivation. One day, I'll prove him wrong, he resolved. Over time, Mr. McGrady's criticisms no longer felt like wounds to Elon's spirit. They gradually became lessons. At first, they were a source of anger and a sense of injustice. But as Elon grew older, he realized that sometimes people like Mr. McGrady failed to recognize a student's potential. That didn't mean the potential wasn't there. In a way, Mr. McGrady had taught Elon an indirect yet invaluable lesson. The world wouldn't always be ready to embrace one's ideas, and that was okay. What truly mattered was believing in oneself. Elon Musk never imagined he would encounter Mr. McGrady again, especially under such circumstances. He observed the man, the once intimidating figure from his school days, who now appeared frail and isolated. Mr. McGrady's eyes, which had once been sharp and commanding, were now clouded, reflecting unease and shame. Elon cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "How have you been, sir?" The question startled the old man. He looked up, his eyes momentarily filled with surprise, as though he couldn't believe that the well-dressed man before him had addressed him in such a way. You must be mistaken," the old man stammered, his gaze dropping again as if trying to hide himself. "I'm just an old man. No one remembers anymore." Elon smiled, his warm voice tinged with a hint of humor. "Not at all, Mr. McGrady. How could I ever forget a teacher like you?" The old man froze, his frail hands instinctively gripping the edge of the table. The name McGrady had been spoken with a familiarity that unsettled him. He looked at Elon again, his eyes scanning the man's face, searching for something familiar. Leaning forward slightly, Elon's gaze softened. "It's me, sir. Elon Musk. More than 30 years ago, I was in your physics class back in Pretoria. You were the one who taught me physics." The words hit the old man like a thunderclap. He sat upright, his eyes wide, struggling to recall. Slowly, fragments of long-buried memories began to surface. A skinny boy sitting in the back row, his bright eyes brimming with curiosity, yet often the target of sharp critiques. "Elon Musk?" he repeated, his voice trembling with disbelief. "You're that Musk? The boy who always came up with those strange ideas?" Elon nodded, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Yes, sir, it's me. The boy you once said was only good at fanciful daydreams and couldn't stay focused long enough to succeed." A heavy silence fell between them. Mr. McGrady stared at Elon, and slowly his face crumpled. He closed his eyes and let out a long, heavy sigh, as though he was staring into a mirror that reflected all the missteps of his past. I don't know what to say," he stammered. I was too harsh with you. I made so much mistakes." Elon shook his head, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't need to apologize, sir. You taught me important lessons, even if not all of them were easy to accept. It was your criticisms that pushed me to work harder, to prove to myself that I could succeed. And now I understand. It wasn't because you hated me. It was simply the way you believed was best to shape your students." Mr. McGrady lowered his head, his hands clasped tightly together, his voice raspy with emotion. "I always wanted my students to be perfect, to never make mistakes. But I've come to realize how wrong I was. I didn't encourage exploration. I forced you all to conform to what I thought was right. I failed to see your potential, and the potential of so many others." Elon gently placed a hand on his former teacher's shoulder, his gaze filled with compassion. "No one is perfect, sir. What matters is recognizing our mistakes. And I'm here today to thank you, not just for teaching me physics, but for teaching me resilience, for teaching me to overcome doubt and believe in myself." Mr. McGrady looked up, his eyes glistening with tears. This was no longer the small boy he had once criticized, but a successful, extraordinary man, brimming with forgiveness and empathy. In that moment, the burden of guilt Mr. McGrady had carried for years seemed to lift, if only slightly. "You're so kind. I don't think I deserve this," he whispered. Just then, the young waiter arrived with steaming dishes, his earlier irritation replaced by a courteous demeanor and a warm smile. Elon Musk respectfully invited his former teacher to enjoy the meal. The two began eating, their conversation gradually becoming more open and heartfelt. Slowly, Mr. McGrady's story began to unfold. After retiring, life had not been kind to Mr. McGrady. His beloved wife passed away after a long battle with illness. His son, the one he had once hoped would follow in his footsteps, fell into crippling debt and distanced himself from his father. Losing his family, Mr. McGrady also lost his sense of direction. A failed investment forced him to sell his home, leaving him to drift aimlessly. From a proud teacher, he had fallen into the depths of poverty. Elon sat silently, his gaze fixed on his former teacher, as though he were trying to absorb every bit of the pain Mr. McGrady had just shared. After a moment, the old man lowered his head, his voice breaking. "I always thought I had everything, Elon, but it turns out all I had were rigid standards and an empty sense of pride. And now I have nothing." Elon slowly nodded, his expression thoughtful and serious. He thought back to the man Mr. McGrady had been all those years ago, a proud figure standing at the front of the classroom, never showing a hint of vulnerability. It was hard to reconcile that memory with the frail, weary old man sitting before him, weighed down by a lifetime of regret. "Mr. McGrady," Elon began, his voice warm yet firm, "I understand how you're feeling. Mistakes from the past can haunt us, but it's never too late to make things right. You still have the chance to do something meaningful, and I'm here to help you make that happen." Mr. McGrady looked up, his tear-filled eyes glistening. For the first time in many years, he felt a faint glimmer of hope piercing through the darkness that had consumed his life. He sat still for a moment, as though grappling with the meaning behind Elon's words. His gaze lingered on Elon, filled with gratitude and hesitation, as though he couldn't quite believe that he was deserving of such kindness. "Elon, you're so kind, but I don't know if I can do anything anymore. I've lost everything, my family, my career, and even my faith in myself." Elon leaned forward, his voice still gentle but filled with conviction. "That's not true, sir. You were someone who inspired an entire generation of students. Even if you were strict or made mistakes, you still taught us important lessons. And today, you can still make a difference, not with the old standards, but through your story and experiences." Mr. McGrady hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He had never imagined that his years of pain and loss could become a lesson for anyone else, but the determination in Elon's voice sparked something within him. A glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in a very long time. In the days that followed, Elon began taking action. He arranged for Mr. McGrady to have a decent place to stay, a small but cozy room at a community center that Elon frequently supported. But Elon didn't stop there. He encouraged Mr. McGrady to participate in talks at the center, where he could share his story with young people. At first, Mr. McGrady was hesitant and unsure. He had grown used to feeling useless, and the thought of standing in front of others again filled him with fear. But under Elon's encouragement, he gradually began to regain his confidence. In his first talk, he stood before a small group of young people, individuals facing various challenges in life, academic failures, family pressures, or feelings of being lost. He shared his story, a tale of a once proud teacher who had been rigid, harsh, and ultimately lost everything because he failed to understand the value of flexibility and compassion. "I once thought I had everything," he said, his voice trembling but sincere. "But I was wrong. We don't measure our worth by perfection or rigid standards. We measure our worth by how we face failure and how we rise from it." His words touched the hearts of the audience. As the talk concluded, several young people approached him, expressing their gratitude. They shared how his story had helped them reevaluate their own lives. For the first time in many years, Mr. McGrady felt that he still had a purpose. One afternoon, as Elon visited Mr. McGrady at the community center, the old man greeted him with a warm smile, a smile that radiated genuine comfort and happiness. Elon, you are right. I still have something to offer, he said, his eyes sparkling with a confidence he had long forgotten. My mistakes weren't the end. They were lessons, not just for me, but for others as well. Elon nodded, his face lighting up with joy. I always believed you could do it. And now, you've proven me right. From that moment on, Mr. McGrady's life began to change. He continued sharing his story, helping others navigate their struggles, and gradually rebuilding his sense of self-worth. Despite his busy schedule with ambitious projects, Elon made it a point to keep in touch with and support his former teacher, a gesture of gratitude for the man who had shaped his early years. Both of them understood that their encounter that night had been no coincidence. It was the beginning of something new, not just for Mr. McGrady, but for a more meaningful journey for both of them. Through this story, we see that Elon Musk, despite his incredible success, retains deep respect for his former teacher, demonstrating a compassionate heart and admirable generosity. Moreover, mistakes and failures are not the end. They are opportunities for growth and renewal. Forgiveness, compassion, and lending a hand can not only bring meaning to our own lives, but also illuminate the lives of others. What are your thoughts on this story? Share your comments below. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.